Today's guest is a retired naval officer. He's a father, a husband, a public speaker, and an author who through tremendous loss has found a deeper relationship with God. And I was blessed to sit down with Mr. Mattera.
In case of emergency break glass, I'm not talking to you. This is spiritual warfare. Talk to the detectives and law enforcement. But in my evening hours, sometimes I would hit the bottle or hard. I was stationed overseas at the time. Massive spike, and we'll call it mental health crisis, coalescing to suicide. Information is to the mind what food is to the body. I don't know how. I have no idea how he's going to use this, but get used to telling the story. I got to see firsthand the weaponization of information. That was going to be the last time I saw my daughter alive. I heard the gun go off, and I walked in the room right after he took his own life.
You know that I've wanted to start something like this for a very, very long time, and I know as long as we've known each other, I've talked about it. And the idea has really come through years of meeting people like yourself that I'm just fascinated with your stories. And there's so many out there that I felt like I wanted to shine some light on those stories, and I want those. I also want the lost ones to live on, and you know the saying, man, you die two deaths, and one's when you actually die, and then when someone stops saying your name. And I know you've experienced as much as anybody with suicide, and I relate to you, but I've never lost a family member. I've lost a lot of friends, but I'm glad you're here. Number one, you're the first guy I get to sit down with.
That could be a good thing or a bad thing.
Well, I believe it's going to be a good thing, and I can't think of someone that with a more powerful testimony than you to sit with. So thank you for being here.
Garrett, thanks for having me, man.
Yeah,
awesome.
Yeah, you betcha. So let's get to know some stuff I don't know, and let's talk about. I want to know where you came from. I know we met 5 years ago, but where do you come from?
So I grew up in a little town called Narragansett, Rhode Island. It's a beach town right outside the Naval War College, which is in Newport, Rhode Island. So a lot of folks out there may have not heard of Narragansett before, but they probably heard of Newport. Okay. And Newport is kind of where all the Rhode Island money is at, and a lot of the folks from New England, especially towards the earlier half of the 20th century, would come down there and spend their money, built mansions over there, all on one of the main thoroughfares, and of course the Naval War College is there, which means there's a big military presence. Navy presence there. Before we moved back to Rhode Island, so born in Rhode Island, moved down to Maryland for 4 years, lived outside of a Navy base again. So a lot of Navy in my background. That plays into the story later on, but originally from New England, and it comes out from time to time when I talk. You can hear the accent, right? I'm not a native Texan, especially when I get cut off in traffic, and then the accent comes out in any event.
All right, so give me an idea. I mean, how'd you grow up? I know you spent plenty of time in the Navy, retired Navy. Where did that come from?
Well, so like I said, so grew up in an area of New England, very a strong nautical influence, and joined the Navy really as a obviously served my country, and all that comes with that. But I think underlying was the impetus for joining the military, but specifically the United States Navy, was to find myself and get away from where I was growing up, because there was a lot going on there. Grew up very difficult. Not to say it was harder than any other people. There's plenty of folks that have had it worse than I did growing up, but grew up in a home that was challenged because of the suicide of my dad back when I was 6. Single family home, and all the challenges that come with that, government assistance, and that was definitely difficult. There was a lot of challenges. My mom had a hard time dealing with the loss of our dad. When I say our dad, because she was pregnant with my little brother at the time. Okay. I think she was about a month pregnant when our dad took his own life. So he never met our dad. Painfully ironic, when I was deployed in 2004, he also died as well from an overdose. But the journey of growing up without a father in a home that was fraught with a lot of difficulty and challenges led me to, when I was 20 years old, say, hey, I got to get out of here. Mm-hmm. I got to find myself, because and if I don't leave home and be part of something bigger than myself, I'm gonna end up either in jail or potentially dead because I was hanging out with some guys that were directionless, and I had that innate instinct. One of the things that was all the challenges of childhood aside, and the things I dealt with my mom. One of the things that I'm very grateful for, that God used her to bake me into a Christian environment and in church. And part of that was I saw a lot of good men in the church that stepped up to be a father figure. And I got the chance to see what right looked like, meaning father in the home, raising their kids, husband and wife relationship, successful. And, and so I was like, hey, I want that. I don't know how to get there, but sticking around here is certainly not the way to do it. Let me get out of here and join the military. And I did.
Okay. So let's back up. I don't know what were the circumstances with your dad?
So my dad, he was, from what I've been told, very intellectual, highly intelligent, gifted guy. He wrestled with alcohol, drug addiction, some other things. I think it was probably some mental health challenges. And I only knew him for 6 years during that short season from the time I was born till the time he took his life when I was 6 years old. He was in and out. He locked up. Had run-ins with the law. Other times he would just take off for days on end and come back. There was abuse within the home. So I saw some things between him and my mom that, just horrible stuff. And that culminated to a fatal decision he made in late August 1984 when took his own life. And I walked right in the room. I remember I heard the gun go off, and I walked in the room right after he took his own life.
So that's earlier than I expected. I, for some reason, thought it might be in your teenage years. And then, so moving from that, you also lost your uncle, correct?
So after I lost my younger brother, my only sibling, in 2004, I was stationed overseas at the time in Japan, on board a warship out of Japan, in and out for deployments and all different national taskings. While I was on deployment, I was an E5 at the time, so mid-grade, kind of junior enlisted, and I got the notification, an AMCROSS. And for the military folks in the audience, they'll know what that is. Basically, it's Uncle Sam's way of saying, hey, there's been a tragedy that took place back home. Request the presence of the service member to be back with the family, whatever that looks like. So in that case, I got an AMCROSS saying that my little brother had passed away. I didn't know the circumstances at the time, how he had passed away. I was had to go into the chaplain's office and make the phone call. And we're talking 2004. So what's interesting was I was as enlisted, my career field was within communications. So I knew the system that I was going to be dialing up. And 2004, the technology isn't what it is today. Although we had military grade technology, we had the best of the best available to us at the time. So I called up halfway around the world, satellite communication. You could hear the echo in the phone, called my mom, and found out that he had passed away from what they thought was an alcohol overdose. They weren't quite sure. It wasn't until I got back home to Rhode Island and I got a chance to talk to the detectives and the law enforcement that handled the case, and they kind of gave me the inside, kind of the morbid details of what had transpired. He died from alcohol poisoning, come to find out. Okay. And he was underage. He wasn't, when I say underage, he was over 18, but he wasn't 21. I think he was 19 when that happened. A few months after that, and we buried him, by the way, in the same cemetery as our dad. So dad's grave was over here, stood at the foot of my brother's grave, and was in my dress blues. My oldest daughter at the time, Elizabeth, was right by my side. She was only 4 years old, and popped the salute and wearing my Cracker Jack navy dress blues, and as they lowered the casket, and I just waterworks, because it was so, not only did I lose my brother, but it was like I felt alone. Like, here I am all alone now. A few months after that passing, which was very difficult for me, I wrestled with his passing, and not in a good way. I didn't deal with it in a good way. I found out that an uncle on my mom's side of the family had taken his own life. Army veteran, wrestled with a lot of the same issues my dad did, substance abuse and so on, and he had ended his own life. At that point, I was mad at God. I was like, first my dad, which sucked, and all the cascade of of damage that was inflicted on our family growing up in a fatherless home with all that. Now my little brother, who I had just talked to on the phone a few months prior before I went on deployment, now he's gone. And then an uncle of mine on my mom's side, who I was very close to, got me into baseball cards and all that. Now he's gone. Like, all right, God, now I'm not talking. Unless I really need you, in case of emergency break glass, I'm not talking to you. And that was also in 2004. So that was one uncle.
Okay.
Left, transferred out of Japan, got stationed in Hawaii. And while stationed in Hawaii, it's my wife, our oldest daughter, Elizabeth, and my wife is just a few months pregnant with now our middle daughter, Isabella. And I get a phone call from a cousin on my dad's side of the family, a cousin I'm very close to. And he was upset, and he told me that his little sister had taken her own life. And so I had to fly out of Hawaii, go back home to Rhode Island, and bury a cousin next to my brother, next to my dad. That uncle on my mom's side is in a veteran cemetery. So again, that just one more reason in my mind to be like, all right, God, you're letting all this stuff happen. I know you're out there. I believe you're there, but we're not talking. Not unless I really need you. We're just not talking. I'm trying to figure this stuff out on my own. And like I said, joining the military was for me a point of therapy in the sense I'm just going to pour myself into my work, but secretly I'm holding all this inside. So what that meant was at work, high performer, high speed, low drag, stand up, sit down, salute, yes sir. But in my evening hours, sometimes I would hit the bottle a little hard, trying to medicate that pain.
Yeah.
It wasn't until 2012 where there was a major paradigm shift for us.
In 2012?
In 2012, yeah.
And that was?
So 2012, or at this point, we've transferred from Hawaii back on the East Coast of the United States. I'm senior enlisted now at this point, so I'm a Chief Petty Officer, E7, and I'm on board a warship, another warship, doing the nation's work. And we're overseas in a part of the world that you see in the news all the time. It's in the news right now. And I got aligned with a good Christian brother that took me under his wing. We started doing a Bible study together. Several other senior folks in the chain of command got involved in the Bible study. And in and through all that, we started that Bible study, I want to say, it was right after we got on deployment. So let's say March, April timeframe. August comes around, and I get an email from my cousin, the same one that lost his sister, telling me that an uncle of ours, my dad's side, an uncle I'm very close to, or was very close to, it was my dad's older brother, had taken his own life. And we're in a part of the world doing the type of work where it's not easy to get off the ship and back stateside. But the chain of command was supportive and able to, because they knew the backstory, say, hey, let's get this guy out of here and be with his family. And so we buried an uncle next to a cousin, next to my brother, next to my dad, all in Rhode Island at the same cemetery. But the reason why I say that was a paradigm shift is because I was in that Bible study. I was linked up with some good Christian brothers. We've been meeting twice a week on the ship. So you have to imagine that you got a warship out there and all these sailors and Marines on board doing the nation's work, warriors at the pointy end of the spear, trained to prosecute deadly force if necessary in protection of our national security interests. And inside of that warship, you have professional warriors, but then you had a cadre of Christian warrior brothers that we all understood, yes, we work for the military, we work for the Navy, but we have a higher authority, God. Yeah. And so they were covering me in prayer when I went home on leave to bury that uncle. And that uncle, he, again, wrestled with a lot of the same stuff that his brother, my dad, did. We got really close to that uncle, and I got very close on the heels of my little brother in 2004. He really took me under his wing. I got a crash course in getting to know who my father was, even though, and he took me to the old neighborhoods where my dad grew up. It was, I think in many ways, it was cathartic for him, therapeutic for him to pour into me in that season that we got close. What I didn't know was that he was wrestling with a lot of the same stuff that other folks in our family did. And he made a fateful choice. And so that was in August of 2012, but it was a paradigm shift because I was positioned spiritually with a support system that I knew I wasn't really alone.
Mm. So let me ask you, since I don't fully understand what you do in the military, and I know there's only so much that you can talk about, but would you give us an idea of what your role was, what your MOS is?
Yeah, so when I was enlisted, I came in and joined the Navy as a radioman, kind of an antiquated title. You're thinking radio guys with packs in World War II. There certainly was some of that, part of the job. Well, they changed the title to Information Systems Technician to more modernize the role with digital technology and the advancements in communication systems. So I was an information technology specialist. Did that as enlisted probably for the first 15 years of my career, from E1 all the way to E7. And then once I hit the senior enlisted grades, I transitioned over to the officer side. So I'm a Mustang officer. Mustang's a household term for officers that did a lot of time as enlisted before they crossed over to the officer side, that executive level leadership.
Okay.
And in that role, I was read into a more strategic level of communication systems, and specifically in my last role, my last tour of duty, which was in San Antonio, specializing as we like to call it, the battle of hearts and minds, influence, psychological operations, and how how informational power is the primary weapon system to everything, how we think, our thinking patterns then drive our behaviors, and so how to shape cultures and societies, individuals, and steer them in the direction that best suits our national security interests. Mm-hmm. And in that role, leading up to my retirement, I realized, wow, this battle of hearts and minds that we see from a military doctrine perspective really dovetails to what we read in the scriptures about the heart and mind, and that's really being a spiritual battlefield, right? We're talking the same thing, just to use a different language.
Yeah.
Now, I've since retired and taking that work into some private sector efforts, but that's what I did for, 23 years.
Well, I know that you've got your book Hope out. Mm-hmm. And I'd like to read a bio just so people know a little bit about what you've done and where you've been.
Sure.
Matthew Mattera is a retired naval officer with 23 years of service, known for cutting through the noise and speaking hard truths. With a background in strategic planning, information warfare, and influence operations, he spent his life understanding the battles that shape minds and cultures. His personal journey is marked by devastating loss. Over the span of about 30 years, he lost 6 family members to suicide and self-harm, including his oldest daughter. He captures these experiences in his book, Hope, a memoir, My Journey Above Loss and Faith, not as a tale of defeat, but as a battle plan for life, a call to wake up to the threats we face. Matthew fights on 2 fronts, the battlefield of the mind and the battlefield of culture. He's frustrated with the church's retreat from its rightful place in society, caving in political correctness while a war for hearts and minds rages on. He's an advocate for suicide prevention and mental health awareness, unafraid to challenge the status quo and push people to think strategically about the bigger picture. I know that as I've gotten to know you, again, you've got one of the best vocabularies I've ever come on to. And you have a way of telling a story and what you've been through that still lends hope to what you've been through. And that's essentially why I wanted to have you here. Let's move forward to Elizabeth.
Yeah. So I talked about how when I lost my uncle in 2012, how I was strategically postured and positioned with a good cadre of not only professional warriors, but Christian brothers and warriors in the faith. And that underpinning, that foundation, that kind of brought me back to the roots of my faith, the roots of my faith in that same God that I was pushing. I was doing the Heisman to say, hey, don't talk to me until I really need you. They had brought me back to that, and having that foundation built back underneath me with the loss of my uncle really paved the way and provided stability for what I was about to walk through, and not just me, but my family.
Yes, sir.
Was about to walk through. In May of 2015, a couple of years worth of trauma and challenges had culminated. Elizabeth born in 2000. Our oldest daughter, in her adolescence, began to wrestle with a lot of the things that we see even today, a lot of the youth and young adults wrestling with. I didn't necessarily have the language for it at the time because I hadn't worked at that strategic level yet. I was not yet an officer, and I wasn't read into a lot of that inside knowledge of how the battle of the mind works. Up until that point, I was tactical level communications, at a boots on the ground level type of operation. So I wasn't read in to see that there was a larger connective tissue culturally to the things that she was wrestling with. She had been in the hospital 3 times. One was right after we came back from deployment. Had a huge emotional meltdown, and we had to take her to the hospital. She had been hurting herself, cutting herself. A behavior that even to this day, there's a lot of young people in high school, junior high, especially girls, demonstrate that behavior. And so all these things were beginning to coalesce. Went to the hospital, inpatient. She was gone for about a week. Got out of the hospital, and then seemed to be doing okay for a little bit. She was seeing a therapist, and got her through a routine of talk therapy, medication, culminated to another inpatient event. And then in September of 2014, there was also another inpatient event. So 3 inpatient events total, each one violent outbursts, massive meltdowns, very scary for our family, for myself, Erica, obviously for Elizabeth for sure, because she's just a teenage girl, didn't know what was going on. And then at the time was our middle daughter, Isabella's watching her big sister having these things unfold, having this trauma. And then in May of 2015, it culminated to the most tragic thing I wouldn't wish it on my worst enemy. May 12, 2015, she's at school, gets off the school bus. I'm cutting the grass. And we had about an acre of land. And I'm on my Green Rider tractor. And I had been home from work early that day and several days earlier that week as my chain of command was read into the challenges we were going through, and they were very supportive of, hey, if you need to be home for your family, be home for your family to make sure everything's okay. And so I'm on the rider mower, cutting the grass, see the school bus come up. She gets off the school bus. I wave hi at her. She waves hi at me. She had a real rough week that week. Boy issues, issues with peers at school, bullying, social media stuff. All this stuff was just like coming to critical mass. And like I said, I waved hi at her. She waved hi at me. I put my headphones back on, throttled up the mower, and little did I know, Garrett, that was going to be the last time I saw my daughter alive on this side of eternity. I finished cutting the grass. I figured I probably had another half hour before I had to pick up her little sister from school, go get some cheeseburgers, come home, and Mom would be home later on from work. Walked in the house, couldn't find her. Went outside, couldn't find her. And at this point, I'm like, where is she? Did she have another episode? Did she go off hiding somewhere in the woods, which had happened before? And again, I don't know how long it had been from the time that she got off the bus to the time I found her, but must have been half an hour, 45 minutes maybe. Walked back into the house again for the 3rd time, and for some reason I remember looking down the hallway into the master bedroom. I said, let me go to the master bedroom. And I remember I said I got home from work early, and I had taken my uniform up, hung it up, and shut the closet door, turned the light off, shut the door. I noticed the closet door was wide open, and I saw her laying on the ground, face down. And I was calling out to her, hey, we got to go, kid. We got to go pick up your sister. Time to get up. And little did I know that I was talking to somebody that wasn't here anymore. I walked up to her, shook her a little bit, tried to get her to respond. And I looked around the closet a little bit, and I noticed it looked like I had a bomb had gone off in there. Clothes were everywhere. It was all torn up. I looked down, I saw a little Bible next to her. And it looked like somebody had put their hand in some red paint and had flicked onto the page. That's what got me worried. Like, okay, something's not good. Then I rolled her over. And she had taken her own life the same way my dad had taken his own life. And for me, just the shock of seeing that. And first my dad, then my little brother, and all these other people you killed my kid. And when I say you killed my kid, that thing, that specter, that suicide, and all that's behind it, you took my little kid. And I remember saying, oh God, not my baby, my baby. God, not my baby. Went to do CPR on her. It was pretty bad. It was pretty morbid. I knew she was gone just by looking at her. Went to do CPR on her, and without getting all graphic with it, I've done other interviews before, and I describe it was horrific. I remember grabbing the phone at the same time, trying to check for vitals. I remember at the time I had 15 years in the military, multiple deployments, so CPR qualified, know how to render basic combat first aid, all of that. But I also know when someone's gone. And phone in one hand, barely able to hold the phone, telling them, get over here now, right now. My baby just shot herself. Get over here right now. I just even saying those words now.
Yeah.
I compartmentalize a lot of it, Garrett, because to be able to convey it, I just kind of put it in a box to tell the story. Because if not, next thing you know, you're having a full-blown panic attack, So, everything that transpired after that, 911, EMS, my wife wasn't home yet. I remember our neighbor had seen the ambulances show up and the police cars and all that, and she was able to help. There was a deputy friend of ours that showed up. Interestingly, he had been at the house in January because we had called 911 because she was having an episode. He just happened to be the responding deputy back in January to talk with her. He's also, I believe, still a youth pastor at a local church in that town. And he was off duty that day, and I remember saying, I named his name. I said, get Deputy so-and-so over here as well. He knows our family, please. I don't want to be alone. I don't leave me alone here, please don't. He happened to be off duty that day when he got the call. Driving by our street, he did a 180, came right down the road. He's in civilian clothes, getting ready to do some work, some contractor work on the house. And I remember him taking me into the house and helping me change my clothes because of the, obviously you're doing CPR and you're getting all that on you.
Yeah.
That right there was a paradigm shift for our family. Like I said, first my dad, then my little brother, all these other people, but this killed my kid now. Now I'm coming after you.
How did Erica respond?
They didn't want me calling her right away. They said, hey, don't call your wife. She's at work right now. Wait till she gets home. And I'm like, oh, my wife, man, this is going to break this.
And this is what time?
Well, she got off. It happened in the afternoon after she got home from school. So by the time my wife got home with traffic, let's say 5 o'clock, if I had to ballpark it. Okay. And she gets home. I remember she's coming down the street. I see her car, and they're like, hey, your wife's coming. We need to go talk to her. And I could barely stand up. And so they walk with me over to talk to my wife, and she's like, what's going on? What happened? Did somebody get hit by a car? She didn't know. She thought, did Isabella get hurt? Did Elizabeth get hurt? And she's asking all these questions. And I'm like, honey, and I can't even get the words out of my mouth. Yeah. And then our deputy friend told my wife what happened. And my wife just, man, to hear the heartbreak of a mother like that, it's a sound you never want to hear. And I had to hold her up and hold my wife up. That and having to tell my youngest daughter, who's now our middle child, to tell Isabella, who's just 7 years old. It's funny, I was just talking to her the other day about this because she's now 16. And just to have to tell her that her big sister's not coming home and have to explain that to her, and just to see her just pour and cry. It's like I felt like I couldn't just protect one little girl. I couldn't protect both of them. And that's something that I carry with me. It's fuel.
Yeah.
It's fuel, but it fuels that tenacity to get after this thing.
So you're still in the military at this point?
I was still active duty at the time. I was getting ready to head off to the Naval War College, a place I grew up right outside of, because I had just been selected for a commissioning to become an officer. And what's interesting, the community I was working in as enlisted and I was about to go into as an officer, it's a very tight community. You're talking communicators, career communicators, from tactical level communications, operational, all the way strategic level communications. And the team of guys I had worked with, we all knew each other, either by first-hand relations or second, third order, like knew a guy from another command and all that. All professionals, professional warfighters, and they rallied around me. They say, hey, Matt, what do you need from us? Whatever you need. That brotherhood, that empathy. And I'm telling you, man, Hollywood portrays military guys as being these, bullets and barbed wire for breakfast. But I'm telling you, you talk about a heart of warriors that are able to, because they've seen when we've lost so many of our own, not only on the front lines overseas, but here in the United States, due to this thing that had stolen, and now at that point, and 6 people in my family, suicide. And they knew my personal story up to that point. And so they just rallied around me and they said, hey, I know you've been selected for commissioning. Do you still want it? And I said, you doggone right I do. You're damn right. This is something I've worked my whole life for. And my wife, she's like, you're getting that commissioning. We're doing this as a family. We're not letting the adversary kick us while we're down. We're gonna track forward.
Yeah.
As painful as that was. So we buried my daughter in May up in the same cemetery next to my dad, next to my little brother, next to a cousin, next to an uncle. And that was in May of 2015. I'd had to go right back to Rhode Island that September at the War College, knowing that just a few months prior, I just buried my oldest daughter, my little girl, in the same cemetery I had buried so many other people.
Yeah.
And I remember standing on the parade grounds of at the War College. We were doing our morning physical fitness training, and it's a sunny afternoon or morning in Newport. Breeze coming over the bay. I could see the Newport Bridge, and just the irony of it all. Like, holy smokes, man! I grew up here. I left the Navy to get away from all this. Now I'm back, and it's on the heels of losing my daughter to the same specter that killed all these other people, including her grandfather, my dad. And I'm here also turning the page in my career to become an officer now and not knowing what was going to come next in my life. It was just a very spiritually supercharged moment. And I definitely felt God with me the whole time. He said, I got you, kid. I know this sucks, but I got you. Just hang on. Just hang on. And then from there, I left Rhode Island after I graduated school, went to my next job back on the East Coast, back in Norfolk, Virginia, to assume my new role as a division officer at a new command.
I'm sure you've heard me talk about Mason Sawyer, and I may have seen the podcast interview I did with him, but you two are the only guys that now granted, he lost his wife, his daughter, his brother, his nephew, and his son all in one accident. Mm-hmm. But when I think of you two guys and how you've lost so many in your family, I definitely want to get you guys connected too. I think you guys need to meet each other.
Yeah, that'd be great.
I want to know, at what point did you decide to start the Elizabeth Mattera Foundation?
That was on the heels of writing the book. The day we buried Elizabeth, I remember standing at the end of my cousin's driveway. This is the same cousin who lost his sister. This cousin I said I'm very close to, right? So he lives right across the cemetery. You walk to the end of his driveway, there's a little small 2-lane road, and then right across is one of the entrances to the cemetery. If you stand at the end of his driveway, you can look down and see the headstones of all our family members. We had just buried Elizabeth that day, so she obviously didn't have a headstone yet. But I remember standing there at the end of the driveway, and I looked at my wife and said, God's going to use us. I don't know how. I have no idea how he's going to use us, but get used to telling this story. Get used to a camera. Get used to a microphone. Not to get famous. I can think of a lot of things to get famous and rich for. This is not it.
Yeah.
I'll go invent some widget and gadget, make a bunch of money like the iPhone did. Let me do that. Don't let me. And I got no problem. The gift of gab, that's part of it. And it's one of the things God's baked into me.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of things I'd rather be talking about than talking about this. But I told her, honey, get used to it, because God's going to use this for good. And I think that came from twofold reason. One, I'm like, man, this is my little girl now. I want to honor her. Yeah. And that I believe in God, but I also believe there's a devil out there. And I'm a very, very strongly understand that there's an adversary. Comes to kill, steal, and destroy. And my attitude was, that son of a bitch isn't going to win. He killed my kid.
Yeah.
And so we're going to go after it. And whatever that looks like, I got all of heaven behind me now, which I had it all the time. But now I'm going to leverage all that. And I didn't know what that was going to look like, but I just knew there's a story there to help other people, get it out there. At a minimum, just to keep her name alive. The world's going to know who Elizabeth was and still is. But also, they're going to understand the path and the road that led up to that. Because I knew it was a whole lot bigger than just, one more statistic of a suicide with a teenager. No, we're going to unpack this thing. That led me in the journey of writing a book. That really didn't coalesce until from 2015 to 2016. We spent that first year learning to walk again.
Yeah.
Mentally, emotionally, spiritually, and in a lot of ways even physically. Just to grab yourself by the bootstraps. All right, I got to get up. I have another little girl to take care of. I have a wife that needs me, and all that. So in 2016, we went to a local church, Wave Church in Virginia Beach, pastored by a great guy, Steve Kelly. Introduced him to, we had gone there when I first got stationed out there in 2010, stopped attending for a while, and then in 2016 returned. And I said, hey, Steve, all this stuff has happened. He's from Australia, good guy. He's like, hey, mate, I remember you. Tell me, how's it been going? I said, well, now that you ask, all this stuff has happened since the last time I came to church. He's like, wow. So I got on his calendar, and a lot of good mentorship, listened to me, heart of gold, a lot of empathy, high emotional intelligence. And he said, you need to write a book, Matt. You need to write a book. Get that in there. And so that started the journey of, okay, well, I'll just start blogging. Initially, I started blogging just kind of generic leadership stuff, lessons learned from the military, character-based stuff, type of stuff. Mm-hmm. When I was stationed out here in 2018, because I knew I was going to end my career here, I could have stayed in. I could have stayed in for 35 years if I wanted to. I had the legs for, as we say in the military, based on my career progression, I could have retired at a higher grade if I wanted to. It means I would have been in longer, more deployments and all this, and now I'm going to wrap my career up. It's a 6-year obligation for earning the commission. You owe the Navy 6 years. I'll do the 6 years, and then I'll retire, which took me to 23 years. When I got stationed out here, the command I was about to be stationed at required me to go to the Joint Forces Staff College and learn some very interesting things about the battle of hearts and minds. I got read into how the human mind processes information, what is informational power in the first place, and how that plays into the shaping of cultures, from an individual to a family, communities, and entire countries. And in my role with all that knowledge from the schoolhouse, very advanced courses, brought that knowledge to my command that I was going to end my career at. I got to see firsthand the weaponization of information. Everything from what you read in the newspaper and see on TV to that smartphone, how that's truly a weapon system. By the time conflict plays out and people are shooting at each other and you're flying planes over, that's the lowest level of warfare. The highest level of warfare takes place here within the cognitive domain. And they taught us that. They taught me that. And in that role, I had this aha moment. I said, oh my gosh, this is spiritual warfare. This is what Paul talks about in the scriptures. It's laced through this, the hearts and minds, informational power, sentiments, thoughts, ideas, and how do they form, and how do you get ahead of that? And how do you shape the cognitive terrain to be favorable to what God has to say versus what the adversary has to say? And so got plugged into another church here, made a lot of good friends. One of those friends is a Pulitzer Prize winning writer, seasoned in all things writing and public relations, as to wrote for Time Magazine, not Time Magazine, but Sports Illustrated, New York Times, so on. Respected writer in that space. And we became friends, and he kind of coached me for the writing. He said, hey, look, you need to start writing blogs specific to this story that you want to share.
And you did that for how long? I
did that. So I started that journey of blogging, what would end up becoming the book in I want to say October of 2018. And then eventually got them all put together, blog, kind of chronological. So what you read in the book is what was a blog. And I figured, well, let me write it in a blog format first, get it out of here onto the public space, and then from there, we'll circle back and codify it, clean it up, make sure it all marries up well, and get it off to an editor and so on. Wrote the book, released the book in May of 2021. So writing a book, especially such high gravity, you're not writing a tech manual.
Yeah.
You're writing very personal things. I ruffled some feathers along the way because I'm talking about my youth experiences. My mom wasn't too happy about it. And I said, Mom, this ain't about you. I'm not trying to throw stones at you, but that's integral to the path that I've been on. And we came to an amicable understanding about it. And that led to the, let's get the book out there, but let's also start a foundation that helps other people that have either walked through that, person had a loss, or have somebody in their family that are wrestling with those types of thoughts, and again, put our daughter's name on it. Like I said, the world's going to know her name, and her name's all through the book, and obviously the name of the foundation, Elizabeth Mattera Foundation. And we've been able to help a family already with that individual lost somebody in their family, and we're able to really subsidize the aftercare that they walked through. And and the reason why we did that was very intentional, by the way, Garrett, because aftercare was so important for our family and I. I knew we had to be intentional in grief counseling, talk to people smarter than ourselves. We're not going to compartmentalize this experience, because that would have put me 6 feet under. Mm-hmm. And I knew what it looked like when I grew up and we didn't get the help we needed counseling after my dad passed away, and I wanted to minimize the damage from Elizabeth passing away. I want to make sure that our other daughter is getting the help that she needs. Erica needs to get the help that they need. Up until that point, I drank from that cup 5 times with a family member. I'm like, and it sucks. Yeah. And I didn't deal with it the right way. I said, this time we're gonna. There's no. How do you manage something that tragic, right? So, well, I know what wrong looks like. We're going to go the opposite direction and pursue counseling and all that. The unique thing was, because I was active duty at the time, with my benefits, it was able to offset the cost of all that counseling. What about those people that don't have those type of resources? And I said, well, you know what? We're a new foundation. There's a lot of things we want to do someday. What's some low-hanging fruit we can take care of right now? Well, let's help offset the cost of some aftercare. At least get people on their feet so they can learn to walk again. Yeah. And then from there, we'll scale and grow. Understood. That makes sense?
Oh, yeah. Do you see, especially with what you've been through, do you feel like God's putting people in your life that, I say this because I feel like that's what I'm experiencing, is people that are put in your life that your situation is needed, your input is needed because of what they're dealing with. Like, in other words, I see so many people find their mission in trauma and tragedy.
Yeah.
In life now. Do you notice that?
Absolutely. Well, they take that pain and they say, all right, well, we're going to do something with this. Yeah. And it's so often, I mean, you have everything like David Mills, right? Kaylee Mills Foundation.
Yes,
right?
sir.
Tragic experience. Yeah. And dynamic couple, and they've taken that and turned it into something so no other parent ever has to walk through that again. Yeah. And that's the same thing again. When you're a parent and lose a child, one of the things I always talk about all the time, it's almost kind of like a bumper sticker now at this point. Not to be glib about it, but I don't want another parent to ever be a pallbearer for the kid's casket. You just don't. Mm-hmm. And to go after the suicide problem, that's the niche that God's allowed us to be, I hate to say subject matter experts, but experiential experts, and having walked through it. Mm-hmm. One of the things that kind of pings on what you're talking about that I've leaned on in turning that trauma into a triumphant experience, right, is and that mess into a message has been, there's a scripture that says, and we know that all things, not some things, all things, work together for good to those that love God and to those that are called according to his purpose. And my conversation with God, and our conversation with God, my wife and I both together as a family, and with our daughter, Isabella, all right, God, you said all things, And it says, we know all things, not we hope all things or maybe all things. It's very, very proactive language in there, right? All right, well, you said all things. Here's a bowl full of all things.
Yeah.
And most of it's not good. Do something with that. And and I write about this in the book. I said, I put my chips in, right? If anybody play poker, boy, I'm all in now. Not keeping one over here, all of it. Joe World, I'm just living in it. Now what? Because I've got 5 people in one cemetery, including my baby girl. I got an uncle in another cemetery over there, and that's a big mess of stuff. Do something with that, because you said all things. And I didn't do that from a sense of cynical sarcasm. It's like, Father, you're all I've got.
Yeah.
This is it. Help me.
Yeah.
And so I think, again, to your point, I think it's when we act as partners in our pain and say, all right, I'm going to not put this in a box somewhere, put a lid on it and stuff it away. Maybe some folks can do that. I can't do that because it's so big and it's so heavy. And I'm very sentimentally driven. So if I hear a song on the radio and it reminds me of Elizabeth,
Yeah.
or I see something, it brings it right all back out, and it's too big to contain. And so I said, I'm gonna take this and utilize this as fuel for something bigger, a lot bigger than myself.
Do you see Isabella getting involved down the road with her being the younger sister of all of this?
It's funny you ask that. After she graduates high school, matter of fact, even now she's taking classes all in things psychology.
Is she?
Yeah, and she wants to go into that world from a faith-based perspective, because we weave in our faith intentionally into this journey of healing and hearts and minds and all that. So she's well on the track for all things related to that. And just recently, my wife and I were talking about, hey, let's get Isabella, leverage her gifts and talents of art and multimedia, and start having her put together managing the website and things like that. So yeah, she's all in with it, because she saw firsthand. She was in the periphery watching those different episodes of violent emotional meltdown as a little girl, and then that impacted her, to be sure. And I think that's paved a path in her mind to say, hey, I want to do my part to get ahead of this bigger thing that's been impacting our culture.
Is she open to discussing it with you guys now, or is it hard to talk about still?
Very open. Sometimes it's just a candid conversation. We're talking about it. And other times it's just, I got to give her a hug because she's going down memory lane and she's missing her sister. And that's always going to happen. You learn to walk with a limp. And sometimes there's days that limp's more prominent than others. And so, but she's open, very open with us.
Well said.
Yeah.
So what comes next? What's next for you guys with the foundation?
Just scale it and grow it. We've got a couple initiatives in mind. Eventually, at some point, we want to weave in like equine therapy, fundraisers, 5Ks, all of that, and just help out more families.
All right.
And then in the meantime, taking that experience personally, unpacking the battle against suicide and its root causes, and then tying that and realizing this is actually downstream, the suicide epidemic that we see with our youth and young adults, amongst middle-aged males, law enforcement, first responders, military, all of that. Those are just 3 big demographics that are increasingly at risk. There's others, but doing a root cause analysis, is that military side of me again. All right, if we're going to get ahead of this, all of that, the suicide problem, which is really an extension of a mental health crisis, what's that an extension of? And then working it back to a larger, across our culture. There's a massive void that's been left in our culture that has resulted in downstream effects, to include the mental health of our communities. The downstream effects are into our economy, downstream effects into our national security, what we see at the border, downstream effects to what we're seeing in entertainment and academics and so on. These are all tributaries, streams down on a larger river. Now, what's at the headwaters of that? And so what I've done is, to answer your question, taken all of that personal life experience, as well as the horsepower I gained in the military of unpacking complex problem sets and identifying ways to get ahead of it so we don't treat symptoms, let's get to the cause. And all of that has brought me to where I'm at today, really kind of the next steps and what those look like.
Give me some numbers, statistics
For the
on
suicide problem?
Yeah.
Well, we all know about 22 a day with veterans. The number's probably a little bit higher than that. It has surged since 2020. Think about what took place on the global stage in 2020.
Yes, sir.
Global pandemic. Yeah. It's also surged with law enforcement, particularly. Think about what the public narrative has been about law enforcement since 2020. Mm-hmm. It's not been helpful, right?
Right.
Then there's the demographics of youth and young adults. Suicides have risen about 60% since 2007 amongst youth and young adults.
Did you see a jump from 20?
It's increased since then. There's been
Feels like it.
Right. And there's all what took place in 2020 with everybody being compartmentalized in a vacuum. Everybody's kind of isolated. That's going to exacerbate the problem. But the youth and young adult suicide problem set has been on the rise. Really, you can put a mark on the calendar. 2007 is really that pivotal moment. And so,
that's what was the marker there? 2007. Is that the?
It's interesting you asked that, because when I was working my last job, and I'm studying the suicide problem, leveraging those skills I had in that job, and I'm finding that there's a center of mass. It's like 2007, article after article after article. Matter of fact, I remember in October of 2019 reading an article that was released by PBS, another article released by another well-known publication. I don't know the name of it now off the top of my head. But anyway, both of them had almost the exact same headline, and they were talking about how since 2007, the suicides have risen amongst youth and young adults. So I had this itch that I needed to scratch. Okay, why? What happened in 2007? Remember I said I worked in informational power, how information is used to shape the cognitive domain, and part of that is your mental health, right? And just full disclosure, I'm not a mental health expert. I don't work in therapy. I know information from a weaponization perspective, how to shape people's thinking. And so, unpacking that, I found that the smartphone was released in 2007. Smartphone as we know it today, right? Where it's all a payload of informational power, something compressed to the size of the palm of your hand, more powerful than in any television studio, newspaper, or radio. Now it's compartmentalized. I mean, you got folks doing whole entire podcasts on the iPhone. People are capturing incidents real time on their phone, and then embedded with all that, then you have the social media aspect of it. And what are the psychological impacts, the mental health impacts on a developing brain that still is trying to discover the world around them and trying to find themselves in a world, right? In the world around them. And so, zooming the lens out, if I compartmentalized it, and I said, wow, so that was the point. That was the X factor right there. Since 2007, we've seen this massive spike, and we'll call it mental health crisis, coalescing to suicide amongst youth and young adults, and now we know why. And now there's more and more talk about it. Fast forward to 2024, there's more and more chatter from other sources besides myself. Subject matter experts that are in the mental health space are saying, yeah, this social media thing might actually not be good for kids, and here's why. And all the things they cite, all the behaviors and the cascade effects, like, yeah, that's what happened to Elizabeth.
Yeah.
But I come at it from not a mental health perspective. I see it as a weapon system. And the adversary, put in a biblical perspective, is certainly using it as a weapon system to wage war on the cognitive terrain, the mental health space, our minds.
Would you give me an example of something that we're not aware of that you're seeing with the cell phone that's so obvious and right in front of us, but we don't notice it? It's pushing it in that direction.
I think if you were to look at social media as part of something bigger known as information, and has ingredients. If you go to the store and you look at the back of the nutrition label, it tells you what's inside of it, what percentage is it, right? How much vitamins and minerals, and what are the primary ingredients, second ingredients. Information is to the mind what food is to the body.
Okay.
And so what's happening is we have similar to there was a movie made several years back called Super Size Me.
Uh-huh.
And there was a gentleman that went and he was testing out
Mickey D's?
Yeah, Mickey D's, and what was going to be the cascade effects over the span of X amount of days, if that's all he ate. Did a baseline.
30 days.
30 days.
Yeah.
He did a medical baseline. Okay, let me get my checkup baseline, all my vitals, and then in 30 days after eating nothing but McDonald's, let's run the numbers again. The numbers are off the chart: cholesterol, blood pressure, all these different things, right? His blood work was all hosed up. By the end of the 30 days of eating nothing but McDonald's, not to pick on McDonald's, but the point being is that information is to the mind what food is to the body. And so social media, to me, especially for young mental metabolisms, is a fire hose of toxic ingredients that leverage some of our most base negative tendencies of narcissism, pride, arrogance. Since for those that are vulnerable to it, they withdraw and they compare themselves to other people, because nobody takes a social media selfie of them when they first wake up. It's always when,
Right.
when the lights are right, the
Yeah.
makeup's good to go.
Yeah.
It's fostered this "look at me" mentality, and that's a double-edged sword. So there's folks on one side of that are like, "Oh, I'll never measure up." On the other side of it, for those that are naturally given to narcissism and being prideful, it causes them to give a false persona. There's the chasing of followers. There's the dopamine hit of every time you get a like, every time you get a retweet or a follow. And so these social media platforms have been engineered. The science is out there. The studies are out there. It's all full disclosure in the public space of how these social media platforms have been intentionally designed and engineered to capitalize on brain chemistry and human behavior. And so I would tell adults, like, don't let your kid get on social media, period, end of story. Just don't. How about you just be a parent and do this thing called no, and say no. Well, I don't care if Susie's got it. I don't care if Bobby or Timmy's got it. You're not having it because I'm your parent. I'm not your buddy. I'm your parent. And so that kind of a part of the work that I'm doing is to have those, to at least compel those difficult discussions. We have a lot of activism that wants to put a bumper sticker on a problem, and to me, that's not solving it. Let's have those hard discussions. Are we saying things? Are we telegraphing things in the public square with communication and messaging that is exasperating the suicide problem? Let's say with law enforcement. What's the current narrative of law enforcement? Well, it's not good. Then we wonder why these guys are doing what they're doing, right? I mean, the job is stressful enough, having to rescue babies from burning cars and getting shot at and all these other things. It's a difficult job with very bad, tough hours. And then we're going to have a public messaging across the board where they feel like that. No wonder they're doing what they're doing. So it's, to me, we need to get off the activism, feel good for a moment, run a 5K, say a couple of things, and then return to status quo. Now, I'm here to demolish that. Let's challenge the status quo and really ask ourselves, what are we saying? What are we doing that is actually exasperating the problem? So if we're worried about kids, youth and young adults, with mental health crisis, and they're taking their own lives, well, why are we feeding them the very thing that's exasperating the very problem we're saying we're trying to solve? Because that's hard. That means that we actually have to do some difficult work and have some honest and uncomfortable conversations with ourselves. Like, actually, maybe we're actually making the problem worse rather than helping it fix it.
I didn't know this about the cell phone in 2007, but I will tell you what I've noticed is I feel like there's a addiction going on that nobody's talking about. It's the addiction to the phone itself. I'm guilty. I spend more time on it than I should. Granted, I've found a lot of potential and opportunities to serve through social media, but why aren't there meetings for cell phones? Because I'd probably be attending one.
Right.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm
Nobody's
Bob.
talking about that.
Hi, I'm Bob, and I'm a Cell Phones Anonymous, right?
Yeah.
Well, it's because we've, when Henry Ford perfected the mass production of the automobile in 1908, he wasn't thinking about seatbelts and DWI laws and speed limits and all that, right? All that didn't come until after, like, oh, wow, more and more cars on the road. Oh, we might actually need to have these things called speed limits. Maybe seatbelts would be a good idea. Yeah. And oh, by the way, pounding a six-pack and getting behind the wheel is probably not a good idea.
Yeah.
I think that same frame of thought needs to be applied to the cell phone usage and information in general, but specifically that, because that became, utilizing a military term, a force multiplier for informational power. The reason why I think it's been difficult for us to really implement some good common sense measures is because there's a lot of money behind it. The social media platforms aren't concerned with pumping the brakes necessarily. More use means more people means more money, or more people means more use means more money, right? And at the end of the day, it's up to just because these advances in technology are made available, we as leaders, thought leaders, as family leaders, as community leaders need to think to ourselves, okay, so we have a thing called a smartphone, and it's great, and I'm able to punch it in GPS and get where I need to get, and I can keep all my photos in one thing, and I can stay connected with distant relatives and friends over the years through things like social. Those are all the good things. I can do my banking, all of that, one-stop shop. Behind that, though, the benefits of informational power, we need to understand there's also this is a double-edged sword. The law of information and influence cuts both ways. And so what that means is, though, we have to have those difficult conversations. And at the end of the day, social media platforms, they want these kids on there. They want them on there. I mean, look at the largest payload, data usage payload on things like TikTok, and it's kids, not you and I. I'm not on TikTok. I'm also not on TikTok because I understand the national security implications of it as well, but I digress.
Can you go into that and help us understand why TikTok is, I mean, you hear people say, man, I would never be on TikTok. Why?
Well, some of these social media platforms are owned by foreign actors. And so you look at something like TikTok, and this is all out there. It's public information. You just got to know what to look for, where to look for it. So something like TikTok is you get something like the Chinese government that has a very big foothold into TikTok, and the way they've designed it in such a way is that they understand that the impact of the algorithm that it has cognitively on human behavior, they've perfected that art. The Chinese and other nation states, but specifically the Chinese, are very good at understanding informational power and specifically its impact on the cognitive domain. Because if we can win the cognitive war, we never have to fire a bullet. Let's win the war over here in the battle of the mind, and then I never have to put troops on the ground, right? The cognitive warfare is the highest level of warfare. And if I can shape an entire population, especially the up and coming generation, to have a certain cognitive posture and certain consumption habits of information, then what I can do is I can then soften them over the next 10, 15, 20 years. There's a guy named Yuri Bezmenov. He's a former KGB agent. He passed away, defected back in the 80s. And he brought, when he defected, over kind of the KGB playbook and the steps of how the former Soviet Union induced cultural change in its target, whoever the target was. It was evil genius, but it leveraged principles of information warfare and cognitive warfare: demoralize, destabilize, create a crisis, normalize. And so those conduits, well, the first thing is demoralizing the culture, and you demoralize by you shaping perceptions, you shape people's attitudes and behaviors. And informational power is the primary way, is the conduit through which you shape your perceptions, you shape a person's thinking, what information they're ingesting, primarily through their eyes and their ears. Mm-hmm. And so, fast forwarding, we know that the Chinese government picked up where the KGB left off, even though the Soviet Union's no more. The CCP and all things in Beijing have certainly done a very good job of picking up where their former big brother, the Soviet Union, had written textbooks on these things and manuals on these things. And so one of those being, something like social media. And not to mention that there's privacy. We download a social media app or any app, and you just agree to the terms and conditions. Nobody ever reads the terms and conditions, and some of those terms and conditions are pretty invasive and pretty spooky.
Is there something that stands out in terms and conditions? I mean, I don't know when I've read them last.
I mean, in some cases, you're granting full access to every platform on your phone.
Okay. Yeah.
Terms and conditions, you grant access to all your photos, all your conversations. I mean, it's spooky stuff. It's wild stuff, and we carry this thing around in our pockets like it's just our wallet. And in many cases, it is our wallet, but it's creeped up on the world stage faster than we realized. And there's people out there with nefarious intent that like to exploit human enthusiasm. Oh, new shiny object, let's all buy it. And go buy the shiny object. I'm going to put stuff on there that you're going to be completely oblivious of, and it's going to be for my purposes and my gain if I was nefarious.
Understood.
That makes sense?
It does. Help me understand the difference between why would Instagram be okay versus TikTok?
Well, when it comes down to the, who owns it and the country of origin, there's a lot of that. But also at the end of the day, whether it's TikTok or Instagram, Instagram's owned by Meta. Meta owns Facebook and Instagram. At the end of the day, all these social media companies, and to exclude recently X, which was formerly known as Twitter, owned by now Elon Musk, but across the board, social media in general, if you stick them all in a basket, all these social media platforms have been engineered, especially the successful ones, have been engineered by people smart, a lot smarter than you and I, that understand human behavior. These things aren't developed by just some guys in a room like, hey, let's build something that's cool. They have the financial capital to leverage human behavior specialists that say, how can we get this to market that's going to maximize the proclivities and even vulnerabilities in human behavior and human psyche. And so the social media, the irony they would even call it social media, when in reality it results in many ways antisocial behaviors and an antisocial posture of the individual. Yeah. And so I would just caution everybody to be very careful. Just like yourself, I use social media. I use it to telegraph message. Hey, whether it's something like, hey, we went out here for dinner. Here's the steak. Some people, benign things like that, or obviously using social media to convey in the public square your message, whether it's your podcast, your brand, your nonprofit. So you can always use it for good, for advertising and messaging. And I'm on there. You have to be. You almost have to be, right? But I'm on there, but I'm very cautious. I always have my seatbelt on. I'm always aware. Seatbelt on.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
Yeah. So with you, and I want to talk about your podcast here in a minute, but will you keep that away from TikTok and only use other social media?
Yes. So TikTok, I'm 100% averse to that.
Okay. Absolutely. That's what I'm wanting to know. Yeah.
Definitely averse to that. Other platform, and that's because of the foreign connection aspect of it.
Okay.
But other social media platforms, we promulgate through there.
Okay. This is a little off of what the subject is, but help me understand if you want to. Why would it be dangerous for this podcast to be released on TikTok?
Well, I think if you'd have to download it on your phone, and when you do that, you're giving permissions.
I see.
Right. So now you're giving permissions and access to it, and that fine print that nobody ever reads. And there's data collection that takes place on that. Patterns of life. They study people's patterns of life based on the data that's collected. And that's not conspiracy theory stuff. Again, you can go anywhere online, just Google it, and there's been more articles written about these, especially in the recent 3 to 5 years. It's been more and more open about that. So I would just encourage people to do their research and agnostically, meaning unbiasedly do your research, and you'll find that what I'm saying is in violent agreement with what the information that's out there saying. Be very cautious, tread lightly, and use wisdom and discernment when engaging in the information environment, especially in the social media space.
Yeah, we're not hearing any of this.
No, of course not.
Yeah. Tell me about your podcast.
The Rexus Nexus. So that's the name of the podcast, and we just kicked it off. We just recorded our second episode. It's myself and a fellow naval officer who's also retired. He did 35 years in the Navy, retired as a commander, prior enlisted Mustang officer like myself. Matter of fact, he's been a strong, not only fellow warrior brother in our career, but also he was he was the guy that brought me into that Bible study when I was on the ship back in 2012. He's closely connected with our family. Just over our house last night, him and his wife for dinner. And his name is Tim. And I said, Tim, I'm thinking about starting a podcast. And oh, by the way, he helped me. He was a sounding board for a lot of the blogs I was writing for the book. And so silent editor in the book. I definitely give him, a shout out in the front of the book under the acknowledgments. But this has been the outcrop of a lot of work that we've done, especially since 2020. 2020, for he and I, we were still active duty at the time. And we saw a lot of things taking place when it comes to COVID and the civil unrest. And we knew behind the scenes where it was coming from, why these things were being leveraged, where the money was coming from, and all that. Right now, I signed a lot of NDAs, so I won't talk about specifics. But what I will say is having that insight and understanding of something that was a lot bigger than what the American public was seeing, and then outside of just the posture of the American public, what was concerning for us, because our faith, being a Christian, is a huge part of my worldview. It's the prime part of my worldview. We were starting to see something that was like, man, the spiritual atmosphere is supercharged, and God's people, the Church of America, has been caught on its heels. and they haven't responded strategically. Matter of fact, they've reacted rather than respond. And so from the reaction of the Church of America when it came to COVID, the fact that all those things that were those edicts about masking up, get your vaccination, close this, can't close that, all of that stuff, the fact that America had gotten to such a point where it was even okay to do that in the first place was concerning. Then the church's reaction to all that, and then right on the heels of that was the mass civil unrest following the passing of George Floyd. And I had a very unique insight and understanding of why that particular incident was leveraged, who was funding the organizations behind that, things like Black Lives Matter, the Antifa, loosely organized group that was helping foment that unrest, and how they were being, in certain pockets of metropolitan areas, burning cities to the ground. And to me, all of that was, Paul talks about, we don't wrestle against flesh and blood, but against principalities and powers, rulers in high, invisible places. And it also talks about how the weapons of our warfare as Christians are not carnal. They're not, bombs and bullets, swords and shields. They're invisible. And to me, that's like, information's invisible. It talks about how our weapons as Christians are about tearing down strongholds, imaginations, thoughts, and ideas. I'm like, you're talking cognitive warfare, thoughts and ideas, battle of the mind. So I talked with my friend Tim and said, Tim, we got a problem. We got a serious issue. Our culture, America has become so ripe for this massive exploitation. And why is that? Because the Church of America has withdrawn from being the voice of primacy, influence, and leadership across these conduits, these pillars of influence that all societies are built upon. Case in point, look what's happened last year after October 7th and what took place in Israel. And then you've been seeing now the response, or the reaction rather, at these institutions of learning, Harvard, Yale, Columbia University, and all these young people with all their pro-Hamas rhetoric. And I go back and think to myself, these were schools that were once started by Christians to be institutions of higher learning so we can better understand the creation that God has given us, to train up the next generation of thought leader to be doctors, lawyers, philosophers, all of that, right? And instead now the church, over so many years, have withdrawn, for a variety of reasons, have withdrawn from that voice of public influence and primacy. So even to the point where you hear time and again, separation of church and state, and the Christians will say that, not knowing and understanding, well, what does that even mean? It's meant to, where the state doesn't tell the church what to do. It's not to call and restrain the church from influencing the political sphere. So if politics is downstream from the culture, if entertainment is downstream from the culture, if education and academia and all things in our society are downstream from culture, what's culture downstream from? From the spiritual climate, the spiritual here. And who's the only organization and entity that's been authorized, deputized, and commissioned per the Bible to exert title, permission, and authority in the spiritual? Well, it's the church. And so rather the Church of America, you have the televangelist movement, you've got the big evangelical non-denominationalism, all of that has become really a machine unto itself, the self-feeding machine that's all about brands and platforms, rather than being a conduit to go outside the four walls of the local congregation to raise up the next generation of psychiatrists, to raise the next generation of politician or civic leader, next generation of entertainer, sports player, and so on. We should be in all those spaces, not compartmentalize church to four walls, if that makes sense at all.
So speaking of spiritual warfare, give me an idea of some of the things that you've learned and that you realize that maybe we don't.
Yeah, a great question. When I was writing my book, because as you know, it's self-published.
Yes, sir.
And I'm writing my book, and in part of that self-publishing journey, you kind of get curious about the self-writing process and how does that work and how do you get on Amazon and all that, because it's through Amazon. They can go on Amazon, Hope, a memoir,
Okay.
Matt Mattera, they could find it real easily. And I should have brought a copy with me, but I didn't. In any event, I was, from the logistical standpoint, I was looking up that book writing process and getting in the public square. And then from a topic posture, I was reading, as I was writing the book, obviously these concept of spiritual warfare was coming into play. So one day, late at night, doing some work, I said, let me find out how many books are written on Amazon and available to the public about spiritual warfare. So I looked it up, and Garrett, there's over 10,000 books written on the topic of spiritual warfare. 10,000 of them. Many from well-known names. A lot of the covers all kind of have the same emblematics. There's a sword, there's light coming down, there's usually a crown, or there's a picture of the armor of God. But they all kind of have the same themes and messages in the emblem. And they all are written by folks that have zero experience on this thing called warfare. Warfare is an art and a science. It's a very serious business. It's a business where, in many cases, people die. And in a spiritual warfare, it's not a cold war. It's a hot war. And so that, to me, was an aha moment. It told me, say, wow, there's a major deficit of knowledge of really what warfare really is. I would almost liken it to a pastor writing a book about spiritual warfare, especially with that word warfare, is like Tom Cruise trying to write a tactics, techniques, and procedures for aviation warfare just because you started a movie. You don't know about warfare. And so that was an impetus for me to bring a voice to that space and challenge some preconceived notions and posture that we have. Because right now, the Church of America has a posture about warfare, a concept of spiritual warfare that basically compartmentalizes it to personal struggles, morality, personal sins, but it doesn't zoom the lens out to the strategic level of how entire cultures are influenced through informational power. And so that for me was like, all right, it's time for me to be a voice in that space, because I was a student and practitioner of war for over 2 decades. Maybe somebody that's actually done this should actually write a book about it, and that's what I'm working on now. That's part of that Rexus Nexus effort. So,
well, I can't wait to see you speaking down the road too.
I would love to.
Yeah, that's going to happen. Yeah. That's going to happen
For sure.
All right, brother.
All right.
Good.
Cool. Yeah, man. Appreciate it.